interrupt me at any moment if something is not clear. I'll try to go as slow as possible. Uh, Okay, so before I go to main talk, so let me just advertise a bit. So I work in broad range of problems in statistical physics. Mostly I work in the area of non-equilibrium statistical physics. I am quite interested in understanding fluctuation relations in non-equilibrium systems. For example, stochastic systems, the small scale systems. And I also work in the area of thermodynamic uncertainty relations. A large part of work you can see that I have worked in the direction of stochastic resetting, which is quite active field in these days. I'm also interested in optimal control theory and applying this optimal control theory to stochastic systems. So very simple systems, but the problem becomes very complicated that I will tell you. And I'm also interested in machine learning, applying machine learning to different systems. But so very recently, we applied machine learning algorithm, supervised machine learning algorithm to infer time delay in stochastic time delay differential equations. And one of the thing that I am interested in to understand optimal control, how to apply optimal control theory to time delay or non-Markovian systems. And very recently, we also build a bridge between stochastic resetting and optimal control theory, that how to reset a system control theory. I'm also interested in theoretical ecology. So where systems, so in theoretical ecology, there are species which are interacting with each other and they're competing for common pool of resources. And then the question that we ask, that how many species will survive? So when they're competing for common pool of resources, and what is the species abundance distribution? Can we compute analytically? And does this species abundance distribution satisfy empirical distribution law? These ecological communities are always in contact with thermal fluctuations or environmental fluctuations. Then one could ask that how these fluctuations can influence the species abundance distribution of ecological community. And this is what we have studied very recently. And I'm also interested in some other problems in statistical physics. Okay, so I'll start from very basic. So a couple of slides will be like quite elementary. So if you're not following, or if you're following it, that's okay. So we all are familiar with thermodynamics. It's a quite established framework. It's applicable to large scale systems. And so in thermodynamics, we know about first law, or law of conservation of energy, that the internal energy of a system increases when we supply heat to the system, or we perform some work that increase the internal energy of the system. Soon we realize that first law of thermodynamics is not enough, because there are some processes which show that first law of thermodynamics can hold for them, but we don't see them. So the second law of thermodynamics helps to describe these kind of processes, and by using a state function called entropy production, or entropy, it says that total entropy of the universe is always greater than equal to zero. Okay. So second law of thermodynamics also puts a constraint or bound on the Carnot efficiency of an engine. But if we try to understand how non-equilibrium processes are governed, so for example, how a system which is driven, if we want to understand how much entropy it produces as a function of time, or how system evolves, or it relaxes, or we try to understand fluctuation, we cannot understand from classical thermodynamics. Then we have to understand these processes from non-equilibrium thermodynamics, or non-equilibrium statistical physics. So in contrary to equilibrium phenomena, non-equilibrium phenomena are diverse. I mean, it can be seen in different branches of science, for example, physics, chemistry, finance, ecological systems. It can be seen everywhere. But there is no general framework by which we can understand this non-equilibrium phenomena, because we have to understand these phenomena by case manner. And researchers are trying to understand what are the universal laws governed by these non-equilibrium systems. And this is a big goal that researchers are trying to understand this non-equilibrium system. Now, one could ask that why don't we start from bunch of degrees of freedom, small scale systems, and drive them and try to understand what are the universal patterns can emerge from these systems. And maybe we can understand more about non-equilibrium system from there. And there is another aspect why we are interested in small scale system, because we have access to biological machines. These are small scale, teeny tiny biological machines, which are of micrometer to nanometer size, which are always in contact with thermal reservoirs and or thermal fluctuations, and they are stochastic machines. And what we are trying to understand that how these machines operate. So these are far from equilibrium systems, and we want to understand how these machines operate, and can we understand the efficiency of this machine, or what are the basic mechanism. So I'll just tell you more little bit about what kind of biological machine one can think of. This, for example, is this photosystem 2. So this photosystems 2 can be seen in photosynthetic organism, for example, plants or some bacteria. So how does it operate? So this colored molecule that I've shown here. So this colored molecule use the energy from sunlight and they break the water molecule. And with that breakage, oxygen molecule released, and that is the same oxygen that we breathe. And then there is a proton and electron will be released. Electron will be used somewhere else to produce sugar using carbon dioxide and water molecule, and hydrogen will be used somewhere else to produce ATP, which I'll be talking later in the same slide. There's another biomolecular machine, is called sodium potassium pump, which is quite crucial in nerve cell. So how does this operate? So for each ATP hydrolysis, it pumps out 3 sodium ion outside the cell and 2 potassium ion inside the cell. So for each ATP hydrolysis cycle, there will be 1 positive charge will be ejected out of the cell. So there will be a constant potential gradient across the cellular membrane, which nerve cells use to produce some signal. This is quite familiar motor, is called kinesin. So how does it work? So for each ATP hydrolysis, this legs or the hand basically. So this actually walks over the microtubule, and it carries a cargo or vesicle from in cell from one part to the another part. So these are basically simple biological machines operating across the cellular membrane. And there's a linear motor, and there are some rotatory motor which are quite fascinating. For example, this flagellum. So this flagellum is seen, this tails that one can see in E. coli bacteria. So this tail, one of the tail, it rotates because of the proton flux across the membrane. Because the proton flux, this stator start rotating and this tail starts spinning around. And these tails are actually here. And when all of them rotate in one singular direction, the E. coli actually moves in a straight line. And suddenly it rotates when some of them start rotating opposite direction. So then it tumbles. So this is called RTP, or run and tumble motion, that bacteria shows. This is another biomolecular machine, which is quite fascinating. It's called F1 ATP synthase, which I will be talking a lot about this. So this is a coupled rotatory motor. So there are 2 components, FO and F1. So FO component is immersed in the mitochondria membrane. There is a proton flux across the mitochondria membrane. And because of the proton flux, the C ring starts rotating. And because of that rotation, gamma crankshaft rotate. And with that rotation, there will be conformation change in the beta unit of F1 unit. And it starts synthesizing ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. So ATP is the energy currency in the cell. For example, we have seen that ATP is used in kinesin, sodium potassium pump, and there are other places also where ATP is used. This is quite fascinating because the efficiency of this machine is 65 to 90%, which is quite high as compared to a normal car, which is like 20 to 30%. And this machine also operates in reversible fashion. For example, if there is excess of ATP in this side, it can start hydrolyzing ATP. And the crankshaft, the gamma crankshaft starts rotating in the opposite direction and start pumping out the proton in the opposite direction. So, and this is a highly non-equilibrium system because this produce thousands of ATP per second. So because it rotates 300 rotations per second. So one rotation is like 3 ATP molecule it produces. Okay, so to fix ideas, what I'm going to talk about in next couple of slides. So let me talk about this biomolecular machine, which can be accessible in experiment. And recently we use this molecular motor in experiment. I'll talk about the experiment that we performed recently and got published, paper got published. So this is F1 ATPase molecular motor taken out from FO and F1. So there is a FO and F1, we take out F1 component and anchored on a cover slip. So this F1 motor, since there is no FO component, so F1 motor actually starts hydrolyzing ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate and use the free energy coming from ATP, the gamma crankshaft starts spinning around. So this is like a chemical motor, which use chemical energy and perform mechanical motion. One can use use a microscope and observe the rotation of this dimer attached on the tip of the gamma crankshaft and observe that how this molecular motor rotate. And people have studied what type of motion that this system show. So this is a small scale machine. For example, this lower part is a nanometer, tens of nanometer, and the upper part is micrometer. So this machine is always in contact with thermal bath. There are thermal fluctuations. Water molecules are colliding with this machine, so there will be fluctuating system. So for this kind of system, one write a very simple Langevin kind of dynamics. So here, theta is the angular degree of freedom associated with gamma coordinate, and omega is the speed, rotational speed. And this moment of inertia coming from the gamma shaft, and omega is again speed. So gamma is the viscous drag coming from the bath, and F theta is the underlying potential energy landscape the system experience. I'll talk about this later part of my talk.
Gamma is a constant coefficient.
Gamma is?
Constant coefficient.
Yeah, it's a constant. And the last part is coming because of thermal fluctuations. So eta is a Gaussian thermal white noise, mean 0, and it's a delta correlated. So for system where Reynolds number is quite low, for example, in biological machines, we can ignore the first part and move this part to the left-hand side, and this equation can be written as overdamped Langevin dynamics. Now, this is a stochastic system, and this is a stochastic system. So if I observe the trajectory for multiple time, it will be quite stochastic. And so, for example, this is a typical trajectory of this molecular machine, which is quite stochastic. So for each realization, you will see a stochastic trajectory. And if I collect the data at the endpoint, I can compute the histogram of this molecular motor, the position of the molecular motor or alignment. One can also write the Fokker-Planck equation, the corresponding Fokker-Planck equation, and solve this Fokker-Planck equation to get what is the distribution profile given the initial condition and boundary condition. For example, in this case, the periodic boundary condition. Okay, so this is a very simple setup that it's applicable to all sort of stochastic system. We write Langevin dynamics, we write the Fokker-Planck equation, and we solve them, do whatever we are interested in. Okay, for such a system, since this is a motor which is converting chemical energy into mechanical motion, one could ask, what are the thermodynamic observables in this system? For example, one can ask how much work I can extract from this machine. So because this machine is utilizing the free energy and it's rotating, so how much work I can extract from this machine? How much heat is dissipated? What is the entropy production? What is the efficiency of this machine? So let me call one of these observable as omega. So omega is functional of theta t, where theta t is a stochastic process. It's a fluctuating trajectory. So For each trajectory, omega will have some particular value. And then second trajectory, omega will have some other values. So then one could ask that what is the distribution of omega? This is what we are interested in. What is the distribution of omega numerically, analytically, or some approximate manner that we can compute it. For macroscopic system, for example, this large cargo, the fluctuations are negligible. Then this distribution is basically a Dirac delta function. The fluctuations are negligible. But if I go to microscopic scale, for example, kinesin carrying a cargo, the distribution will have a finite spread because fluctuations are there. So for such system, for this small scale system, what we are interested in, what is the distribution of work or distribution of heat or entropy production? Or one could ask that, what are the thermodynamic bounds on these quantities? For example, can I compute some alternative quantities which can bound these thermodynamic observable? So I'll be talking about thermodynamic bound in the next slide. And one can ask, if I want to drive this system, for example, I want to drive this motor externally by forcefully, what is the optimal strategy so that the dissipation can be minimized? So in the next slide, I'll be talking about the distribution and symmetry that it shows, and then I will talk about optimal control. So previously, I mean, there has been so much research in this direction to understand the symmetry of this thermodynamic observable. So for example, in non-equilibrium steady state, which is the counterpart of equilibrium system. So in the non-equilibrium steady state, if we observe the entropy production, the entropy production probability density function satisfies symmetry relation. And if I just simply rearrange and integrate over delta S, I get a modified second law of thermodynamics, where angular bracket indicates the average over trajectories of realizations. So this is a modification or extended version of second law of thermodynamics. And this is a quite popular Dzerzhinsky equality, where if we compute work for several realizations of stochastic system, then beta is the inverse temperature here, and this average turns out to be e to the power beta delta F, where delta F is the equilibrium free energy difference. So this expression can be used to compute the free energy difference for different configuration of simple stochastic system, or for example, DNA hairpin. And this expression we can use Jensen inequality, and then we can modify the Classisch equality on average level. So this is a recent result. It's called thermodynamic uncertainty relation, proved by Seifert. It extends the second law of thermodynamics. It says that if I measure arbitrary currents in the system, for example, I measure these different components of currents in the system, and then I can bound the total dissipation of the system will be always greater than equal to the ratio on the right hand side. And this says that so here equality is reserved for close to equilibrium system, but very recently we showed that we can use arbitrary current to compute the dissipation in the system in the short time limit. So for example, if I'm performing an experiment, I store the data for very short time, and using that small time limit, I can compute the full dissipation coming from the system.
So when you wrote there the fluctuation dissipation theorem, you have that the entropy is growing, positive semi-definite, bigger than zero.
This
right?
one?
And now you're
This is another relation.
for the same quantities.
Yes. So it's a new result. So this is a new result, appeared in 2015. That's a quite old results.
Yeah, I understand, but then that's like a lower bound on the right hand side.
Yes, I mean it just changes this 0 to this 1. So if for equilibrium this Z will be 0, average J will be 0, then you can go back to the same.
But what is J exactly?
J is the current. For example, if you're measuring the particle, for example, particle speed, for example, or you can make linear combination of speeds, or you can write current with the linear combination. For example, I can write something like current is.
So the current is an external current, or is
Yeah, so it's basically you measure the trajectories and you can compute the current using some arbitrary current. So this is the this one. So this. So this is a particle position and this is speed. We can discretize that, and this d is up to our control. So we can choose different d, and there will be some d which can maximize this right-hand side so that this bound can be saturated. This has been proved very
but the
recently.
D is an external thing?
No, d is just purely arbitrary. You can just write d as a linear combination of x.
No, but d should be anti-symmetric, right?
Yes, anti-symmetric, yes. Otherwise, you will get 0. Okay, so these theoretical results are not just uh, uh, pure theoretical construction, but they have been tested in several experiments. For example, in the top left one, here they use a single colloidal particle in a periodic potential, and they are driving with constant force. And they compute the fluctuation theorem or entropy production, and they show that this system shows fluctuation theorem that I showed in the first slide. And the second one, they compute the work for a colloidal particle in a time-dependent non-harmonic potential, and then they compute probability density function, and they show that this work also satisfy fluctuation theorem. And the next slide, in the next one, rightmost part. So here they compute the entropy production for partial system, and they show that if you have partial information, the fluctuation theorem will not hold. And similarly, these results, they also tested, some of the researchers have studied fluctuation theorem for quantum double dot setting. No, whatever. Okay, so there are other experiment, for example, trying to build a small scale engines where you have one single colloidal particle, and you have this single colloidal particle in a trap, and you change the stiffness of the trap. So the stiffness of the trap actually playing the role of a piston, basically, in a microscopic system. And they compute the efficiency or efficiency fluctuation for these kind of systems. And there is another experiment that we performed, and there are other studies about this experiment that I'll talk about. Okay, so now I'll talk to the main part of the talk. So this is called optimal control. What do I mean by that? So, for example, I want to build a microscopic engine which is composed of a single colloidal particle in an optical tweezer. And I want to find a specific protocol how I should change the stiffness so that the efficiency is maximized. So it's like stochastic optimal control problem. There can be other problem, like, for example, if you have a DNA hairpin, so where the bottom part is fixed in at a micropipette, and the upper part is there is a polystyrene bead attached on the upper part, and this polystyrene bead is confined in an optical tweezer. Then what one can do, one can pull this DNA hairpin using optical tweezer, and then one can ask that what is the optimal strategy by which I should pull this DNA hairpin so that the work is minimized or dissipation is minimized. So these kind of problems are normally can be seen as like a system in a complex landscape where A and B are the configuration of some system, and system is actually so suppose you want to drive a system going from one configuration A to B following this trajectory, then one can ask that what is the best possible strategy by which I drive the system along this trajectory so that the dissipation can be minimized. Or one can ask that what is the optimal strategy by which I go from A to B in a least time? Or I can combine both of them. So there's a complicated optimal control problem, stochastic optimal control problem that one can try to formulate. Okay, so now I talk about optimal control of F1 ATPase molecular motor. So I already talked about FO and F1. This is quite nice and interesting molecular motor. So what in experiment, what can do? They can take out this F1 component and attach on a cover slip. And this role of this C-ring is replaced by this dimer, the magnetic dimer. And without the presence of this FO, this molecular motor hydrolyzes ATP into ADP and inorganic phosphate. But if I replace this C-ring type of thing using magnetic dimer, I can generate a forced motion using magnets, and then I can start synthesizing ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. So previously it was hydrolyzing, now it's synthesizing. Now question is that what is the best possible strategy by which I should rotate so that it starts synthesizing ATP molecule at low dissipation cost? Okay, so if I rotate very fast, then there will be a lot of dissipation, because we know from second law of thermodynamics, if we go far from equilibrium, there will be a lot of dissipation. But if I rotate quasi-statically, dissipation will be small, but outpower will be also very small. But we want optimal control kind of thing so that we can rotate this molecular motor at low dissipation cost. So this is a complicated problem because system is away from equilibrium, and the potential energy landscape of F1 is highly nonlinear, so which I am going to show now. So this is a potential energy landscape of F1 molecular motor. So so this F1 has threefold symmetry, and there are potentials which are 120-degree apart, and system jumps back and forth following local detail balance, because we need local detail balance to have a thermodynamics of the system, proper thermodynamics of the system. Now, what do we want? We want to rotate the system or drive the system using optical or magnetic tweezer. In this case, it is a magnetic tweezer. So we have this sinusoidal potential that we can create in our experiment, and we can rotate this trap, and with that rotation, gamma crankshafts will rotate, and ATP molecule starts synthesizing from ADP and inorganic phosphate. And this is the total potential energy because of trap and underlying potential. It's a very complicated one, but this is solid lines are the total potential corresponding to 1 and 2 potential. Now, what is the question that let me repeat. So here we want to rotate the system by forcing or by rotating the trap. And then by rotating the trap, we want to synthesize ATP at low dissipation cost. So when we rotate, there will be some work. So work is basically given by force coming from rotation of the trap. And the lambda is the location of the trap. So this is a trap center, which is a control parameter here. Now, the dissipation, when I talk about, the dissipation is coming from second law of thermodynamics, which is average work minus the free energy. So this is the extra amount of work that I pay in rotating the crankshaft and synthesizing ATP molecule. So I can rewrite this expression. And now the question is that how should I rotate the crankshaft? So for example, going from trap location lambda I to trap location lambda F as a function of time, I want to minimize this dissipation. What should be the protocol? Should it be linear or any nonlinear function? So this is a stochastic optimal control problem. And this is a highly non-trivial problem in statistical physics. For very simple setting, when you don't have any landscape system, it's a flat landscape, and you have a particle, colloidal particle in a harmonic trap, and you can drag the particle using this optical tweezer. One can find the optimal control protocol for this kind of setting, or if we are having a particle in a tweezer, optical tweezer, and if we change the intensity of the laser, then what should be the optimal way that I should change the intensity of the laser? so that the external work can be minimized or dissipation can be minimized. So it's a very simple problem when the landscape is flat. In our case, landscape is not flat. It's a non-linear landscape that we have in mind. Fortunately, there is a way to compute optimal control protocol, but close to equilibrium, because there is no way to compute optimal control protocol, up to my knowledge, in the far from equilibrium. So this is close to equilibrium. Doesn't matter what landscape system has. You can compute optimal control protocol using this framework, but this framework is applicable in the linear response regime or system when system is close to equilibrium. So when you are driving very slowly. So using this framework, one can compute optimal control protocol. So when speed is very small, we can expand to the leading order, and then you can write dissipation as product of two quantities, where zeta is the generalized friction coefficient in the control parameter space. It's not a physical friction coefficient, but control parameter space friction coefficient. And this is the trap speed d lambda by dt, how trap is moving. Where this quantity, so we know from linear response framework that we always encounter with some kind of autocovariance function. So here zeta lambda turns out to be force autocovariance function. So now the problem boils down to computing force autocovariance function. So we keep the force fluctuation, and that will give you one zeta value. Then we move the trap to different location, we measure the force fluctuation, we compute second zeta, and that's how we can compute zeta lambda, and that will tell us how friction is experienced by the system in control parameter space. So now this problem is quite easy to solve. So this is if I use simple Euler-Lagrange scheme, I can compute the protocol that minimizes dissipation should be something like that. The speed of the protocol should be inversely proportional to square root of friction coefficient. So wherever the friction coefficient is higher, you drive slower, otherwise you drive faster. So if we know zeta lambda, we can integrate and we can compute the protocol for non-linear system, but close to equilibrium. So I'm going to show one example. Again, F1 ATP is molecular motor. So this molecular motor F1 can be taken out and attached on a cover slip. And this can be rotated using magnetic tweezer. So for example, this magnetic bead is attached there, and this can be rotated using magnetic tweezer. And what we can do, we can compute friction coefficient, and the friction coefficient is quite non-linear. So here I'm showing the data for 1/3 of rotation because system has threefold symmetry. So friction coefficient is higher at certain particular location, and this location is same as when system switch from one potential to the another potential, U1 to U2 that I showed previously. So wherever the friction coefficient is higher, we have to drive slower. Otherwise, we have to drive faster. And then we integrate this protocol speed, and that we get protocol as a function of time, where blue curves are the design protocols ones or the optimal one, and the red one is for the naive one, which means that we are driving with constant speed. So we are not caring about what underlying landscape system has, we are driving with constant speed. Now, the question is that, okay, let's compare which one is better, naive or design one. So first we compute dissipation, which I already defined as the work minus the free energy, and delta mu is the free energy associated with one ATP molecule. And for each rotation, there will be 3 ATP molecules. So this is total free energy for one rotation. And here lines are for linear response result, close to equilibrium. Symbols are for exact result, basically not assuming linear response result. Along the x-axis, I have protocol duration, so how slow I'm driving. So large protocol duration means slowness. Along the y-axis, there's a dissipation, and we can see that our exact result starts matching with linear response result in the slow protocol duration, slow protocol speed limit, or large protocol duration limit, which is expected because in the long protocol duration limit, system will be close to equilibrium or linear response result, linear response limit. So what we can do, we can compare the ratio of naive and design one, the dissipation one. And if the ratio is above 1, this means the design is performing better because this, and what we can see that for considerable range of protocol duration, design protocol is performing better than the naive protocol. Okay, so far I talked about linear response optimal control protocol. Although we use a linear response theory, which was close to equilibrium, but the system was far from equilibrium. So linear response is basically towards the right side. So following linear response, we actually found a protocol where design protocol is performing better than the naive protocol regime. So we can drive the system in this protocol duration limit where the design protocol is performing better than the naive one. Now, we were also interested to apply this linear response framework to drive active particles. Although the active particles are not close to equilibrium, they are far from equilibrium. If depending upon the boundary condition, they can be in non-equilibrium stationary state. And these active particles are, for example, E. coli bacteria. They use energy from the environment and they move in a straight line, and suddenly they change direction. This is called RTP motion. And there are other type of active particle, for example, active Brownian particle, where angle actually switches, basically the same kind of particle. There's another kind of active particle that researchers are interested in. It's called active Orenston-Ullmann particle, where the noise or the speed follows Orenston-Ullmann process that we know from mathematics. So this can be seen, this kind of particle also can be seen in experiment. For example, if you have a colloidal bead in the bath of E. coli bacteria, the motion of this colloidal bead can be written in the form of Orenston-Ullmann process. There are another type of system where one can see Orenston-Ullmann process, where you have this plastic tube, where at the end of tube you insert two colloidal beads of different density. Because of density difference, this when you vibrate table, this plastic tube start moving in a particular direction, has a persistent motion, and this plastic bead start kicking this yellow bar, which is shown here, and one can model the motion of this bar using Orenston-Ullmann process. And very recently, this kind of process has been used to study information engine by my previous collaborator. Okay, so now the question, what is the question that I'm asking? So suppose I have a particle here in a nonlinear landscape, and this landscape can be representing some configuration, and what I want to drive the system going from left to rightward. And what is the optimal strategy to drive the system? If the particle is not active, then this is a Langevin dynamics, overdamped Langevin dynamics, where you have Ux is the potential energy landscape system has, and U trap is the trap potential, and eta is the Gaussian thermal white noise that I was talking about. Now, when the particle becomes active Orenston-Ullmann, there's an extra piece comes. So, for example, this particle is in the bath of E. coli bacteria. So Yt will be represented by this kind of motion, and this Yt is colored noise, so which has exponential correlation. So trap that I am considering here is harmonic trap, which can be modeled in experiment very easily. So the question that I am asking, that I want to drive this particle over this landscape so that the work is minimized. So this is kind of optimal control problem here. And again, the potential energy profile is nonlinear, system is away from equilibrium. And then one can ask that, what's the work? Work is, this is stochastic work for given trajectory. And then one can ask that, how much extra amount of work that I pay over the quasi-static limits. So if I drive very slowly and then I drive very fast, so what is the difference? This is a difference here, and I want to minimize this, this difference. So if the system is close to equilibrium or system has equilibrium properties in contrary to active particle, then this quasi-static work will be equal to free energy difference that we know from second law of thermodynamics. But for this active particle, this quasi-static work will not be equal to free energy difference. And here I'm showing the plot difference between free energy difference and quasi-static work, and that depends upon the model that I'm considering, but they are quite different. And this is what I want to minimize. But this is quite complicated problem, and what we try to do, we apply again linear response theory, which is applicable to close to equilibrium, but this system is not close to equilibrium also. But we naively applied this theory to see whether we can get good protocol. So there are two different, there are a couple of parameters here. Persistent time means that how system will move in particular direction before switching its direction. This is a friction coefficient again. And wherever the friction coefficient is higher, we drive slower. And when the friction coefficient is small, we drive faster. And then we integrate this protocol speed, we get protocol as a function of time. And these protocols are quite different as compared to naive or constant speed protocols. We can compare dissipation, and this we can compare dissipation. For example, in this plot, we can see that for considerable range of protocol duration, design protocol performs better than naive protocol, even though we use linear response theory to compute optimal control protocol. So far, I talked about active particle Brownian, active particle molecular motor, and we were finding the optimal control protocol using linear response theory. But in research, in real life, these machines are not close to equilibrium. So then what do? We try to find optimal efficient control protocol by some alternative technique. So this is our recent experiment on F1 ATPase molecular motor. So again, F1 can be taken out, attached on a cover slip. Now, instead of finding optimal control using stochastic optimal control theory, we apply different control protocols. And then we find that which one is better. So there are 4 electrodes here, A, B, C, D. Using rotating electric field, we can generate a constant torque, which can rotate the crankshaft. Or using oscillating electric field, we can generate a trap. So there are 2 types of driving protocol that we can use in our experiment. Either we can confine the bead and rotate it, for example, like this. We can drive the shaft, or we can apply constant torque. So constant force or constant torque is applied. And then we want to ask which one is better, or how F4 drives F1. This can be also kind of answer our question. What we compute work done. So work done is normally the torque times to 120 degrees. So it's like 1/3 rotation, how much work is used to rotate the crankshaft using constant torque. And this is a trap work. And so here we are rotating with a constant speed, and we want to compare both of them. What we found that was quite interesting, that if we rotate the crankshaft using trap, then the work will be lower. So here in the top panel, I'm showing the case when there is F1 is there, and in the bottom panel, F1 is not there. So basically dimer is fixed on a cover slip, and we are using rotating electric field or oscillating electric field, and we are rotating the dimer. The free energy will be 0 here. What we see that when the torque case, work required to rotate for same number of rotation is higher for the torque case as compared to trap case. And then we wanted to analyze more. Then we found Stokes efficiency, and the Stokes efficiency for this motor for angle clamp protocol is higher as compared to constant torque case. Then we moved further, that what is going on. What we try to find that what is the total force that system experiences. For the constant torque case, the force is fluctuating. But for the angle clamp case, the force is not fluctuating too much. So this means that this is the sole reason why system is dissipating too much energy into the environment for producing same number of ATP molecule. This can be further analyzed if we write entropy production and we divide different contribution, and the spatial fluctuation part coming from force is contributing more to entropy production. This is the sole reason why entropy or dissipation was higher for torque case as compared to angle clamp case. Okay, so far I talked about biomolecular machine, active particles, and then now I can just talk a little bit about a different field that I was talking previously, stochastic resetting. This is quite active field in these days. So suppose you wake up suppose you wake up in the morning and you are looking for a key in your house. And how do you start? You start from your bedroom, you go to kitchen, you don't find it, you probably go to living room, you don't find, you come back to your bedroom. Then again start searching. So this kind of process is like you start from somewhere, you start looking around. If you don't find, you just come back and then again start the process. This kind of process is called resetting process. And the time to come back is stochastic. It's random. So you come back at initial location. It's random. This kind of process has been seen in several cases. For example, animals, when they are looking for food, they actually go around. They don't find food. They come back to their cave and they start looking around. So this kind of process called stochastic resetting. And this has been studied quite extensively from 2011 in different fields, for example, chemistry, ecology, and different fields. Now, so let's talk about very simple system, Brownian particle. Single Brownian particle in one dimension. The Brownian particle this Brownian particle can be a searcher, for example. They start from x0, it just diffuses around. And at certain point of time, the searcher actually comes back to initial location. For example, you come back to your bedroom and then you start exploring around. And then you come back again until you find the target. So if you have a Brownian particle, single Brownian particle, there is no confinement. What we know from elementary calculation that if there is no resetting or restart, the distribution doesn't have stationary state because the mean square displacement increases with time. So system actually spreads out. And if we want to find mean first passes time to find the target, this diverges. Why? Because there will be some of the trajectories will go in the opposite direction to the target, and that will contribute to larger amount of the time. So that mean first passes time diverges. But it turns out when you put resetting in the system changes remarkably different. So this system has stationary state. So it's here the time intervals are drawn from exponential distribution, but this can be drawn from other distribution too. So this has cusp behavior as compared to Gaussian nature, and the mean first passes time doesn't diverge in all the limit. So it only diverges when R is very, very large or R is very small. When R is very small, that means resetting rate is very small. That means you don't reset at all. You go back to this limit. But when R is very, very large, you stick to this boundary, this point, initial point. Then you don't explore around, the mean first pass again diverges. But it turns out there is an optimal limit, optimal R, for which the mean first passes time can be finite or minimum. And this can be computed using dimension analysis or exactly. This turns out to be optimal resetting rate. So how optimally you should reset so that you want to find the target. Okay, now this is an instantaneous resetting. For example, if I want to make an experiment or do some experiment for a colloidal particle, bringing a particle from one location to another location in 0 time, that's not feasible. So how should we do experiment? We use normally optical tweezers, and these optical tweezers takes some finite time to bring the particle to some particular location, for example, minimum of the trap. So the problem is about going from non-instantaneous to instantaneous to non-instantaneous resetting. So this is an experiment recently performed. We have a Brownian particle which is diffusing around, and at certain interval of time, you shine a laser. And this will bring the particle back to the minimum of the trap. And you leave the trap for a couple of relaxation of time. System will relax to its equilibrium, equilibrium with respect to the trap. And then you switch off the trap and the particle will again diffusing around. And this kind of resetting problem, you are just trying to bring the particle back to initial location and let the particle go away when it relaxes. And then that's how, if you repeat many times, you can compute stationary state and mean first passes time. And you can predict what has been proven earlier. That mean first passes time is stationary state, and so stationary state probability density function reaches stationary state, and mean first pass time becomes finite for given resetting rate. There's another experiment previously performed. Instead of a particle that is moving around without any confinement, they used two harmonic confinement. So this is blue shape is a shallow potential, and then there is a sharp potential, which is a resetting one. So this switch on, switch off this potential is kind of ratcheting. And then you switch on, switch off this potential stochastically. And then you want to find how much work that you perform, what is the entropy production during this resetting protocol that one wants to compute. And this work, they computed average quantities. But we wanted to go beyond that to compute this for any arbitrary dimension for any potential energy profile. For example, you go from U to V, V to U in a stochastic interval of time, and where V is the return phase or resetting potential, where system will reset to equilibrium distribution with respect to Vx. So basically what I am saying, you start from Vx, this is a resetting potential, go to Ux, stay there, stochastic interval of time, then you jump back to and stay some time in a Vx potential, which is basically a couple of relaxation of time, and the system can reset to equilibrium distribution with corresponding to U, V of x, and then you switch off V of x, and this process repeats or reiterate. Now, for this kind of process, one can ask that how much work we perform by switching on and off laser, how much work we perform to reset the system. And this work can be computed using elementary thermodynamics. That work is basically change in the potential energy, V to U, U to V. So this part is coming. Coming from V to U, and the other part is coming from going from U. Plus minus sign are representing after the switch and before the switch. And this is a stochastic quantity because there are several degrees of stochasticity here. One, the initial condition is stochastic. So every time particles start from some distribution drawn from this potential, this distribution, there can be thermal fluctuation because there is a single particle, thermal fluctuation will be there. Time interval can be stochastic. So there's stochastic time interval. And then what one asks that, what is the probability density function for this work? So there's a complicated problem. And what we try to find analytically, what will be the distribution or cumulant generating function. So cumulant generating function is basically, we want to compute this quantity where K is the conjugate variable with respect to W, and we average over different stochasticity or different trajectories coming from this stochasticity. And the only assumption that we put in this calculation, that system will relax in the equilibrium with respect to resetting potential. And this is same as what we did, what people have done in their experiment. When system is resetting to V potential, it relaxes it stays there for a couple of relaxation of time. So then we put a very small assumption there. And what we found that this assumption is quite valid and it works quite well. So the expression comes out a very nice, neat and clean expression, because by putting this constraint that we put that system will relax to equilibrium with respect to V potential, system has a renewal structure. So I can use renewal theory to compute a moment generating function where the first term coming from the initial switch, and there are some switch that going from V to U, U to V, that term comes from here. H term comes when system stays at the end time in the V potential. Small h comes when the system comes back to U potential. So this can be computed analytically. And if we have this, we can invert that and compute the probability density function. Unfortunately, for any shape of potential and any type of stochasticity in the time interval, one cannot find this probability density function, but one can compute different moments using this expression. Doesn't matter what potential energy landscape you take, you can compute numerically, analytically. And here I'm showing the simulation and its theory data, and they have quite good agreement. So here system relaxes to relaxation time in a harmonic potential. Now we can also ask that what is the optimal lambda V I should choose that so that the work is minimum. So here we have two harmonic potential and system so we use the stiff potential to relax the system or return the reset the system. Z is the location distance between two harmonic trap, and if the trap distance is 0, then the minimum work will be almost 0, because if it doesn't matter. So if you take lambda u, lambda v to be same, then work minimum will be equal to 0. So it's a trivial line. But as soon as you change the you separate them, then there's a different line that you can see. Along this line, the work can be minimized. The average work can be minimized. One can ask that how fluctuation can be minimized. For example, second Q moment can be minimized. And we can still find this, that second moment can be minimized in this particular region of parameters. One can also ask that if I want to simultaneously minimize mean and variance, then one can construct a linear function depending on parameter alpha and 1 minus alpha. And depending upon choice of alpha, I can find the parameters which can minimize mean and variance up to my requirement. Okay, so this is the last slide. So where we applied optimal control theory to compute thermodynamic cost or for an eraser. So eraser is, so when we talk about resetting is kind of erasure. So you have a system which is just moving around and you bring the particle at certain location, it forgets what happens earlier. So it's like an erasure. And then what one can ask that what is thermodynamic cost of this erasure? So there are Landauer bounds and all bounds are there. What we wanted to put that thing in our resetting calculation to see that what is the thermodynamic cost and can we find an optimal protocol. So here system start again from V, switches to U potential, stays some time, which is exponentially or any distribution drawn from any distribution. And then we go from U to V, not instantaneously, but non-instantaneous manner, because in previous experiment, they changed U to V in a time-dependent manner. So we try to find moment generating function for n erasure cycle. So we go from U to V, V to U, harmonic potential. And then they previously in experiment, they use lambda t that changes in this nonlinear fashion. And then we compute a moment generating function, and these are the results. So basically lines are the analytical results and symbols are the numerical computation data. And R is the resetting rate, and TV and TU are the relaxation time corresponding to U and V. So then we want to find what are the optimal protocol for this U and V when they are harmonic. So is it better than Tench one or not? Then we found it using this previous theory, which is applicable to harmonic potential. We found the protocol has initial jumps, which was seen also in this paper. And here's the result. So the blue one is the Tench case, which they have used in experiment. And there's an optimal protocol, which requires very low amount of when we use this kind of jumps, while changing, going from here to here, we make a jump and then go here and make a jump. And this is a universal bound, doesn't depend on if you have a harmonic potential or not. This is just basically based on first law and second law of thermodynamics, not more than that. We can just rearrange terms and we can get this bound. And this bound is a lower bound that you pay when you are driving the system. Okay, so in the end, so I'll just summarize. So we have a system. This can be in any nonlinear potential energy landscape, and we want to drive from A to B. And we can ask question that what is the optimal strategy by which we drive from A to B when the dissipation can be minimized, or time can be minimized, or it can be simultaneously minimized. I talked about molecular motor. So the molecular motor, we wanted to find an optimal protocol by driving this molecular motor so that dissipation can be minimized to synthesize ATP molecule from this molecular motor. And unfortunately, that was not possible because the system is non-linear. For simple system, there is an exact theory when potential energy landscape is a flat, and then you drive the particle using harmonic trap. One can exactly compute optimal control protocol using Euler-Lagrange theory. For far from equilibrium, there is no theory. But for nonlinear potential and the system is close to equilibrium, there is a way to compute optimal control protocol. And that's what we use to find optimal control protocol to drive this molecular motor. And then we show that even that protocol works quite well for finite duration, finite time protocol duration. Recently, we use two different techniques to drive molecular motor, and we found that maybe FO, that is in vivo, drives F1 in angle clamp manner because that dissipate less amount of energy. That's why this FO and F1 may be highly efficient molecular motor. So this research, whatever I talked about, it opens several interesting questions. So one of the questions that one can ask that what is the how to compute analytically far from equilibrium optimal control protocol? Second, one can ask what is the global optimal control protocol for F1 ATPase, because F1 ATPase is rotatory molecular motor, so it's always rotating. And then you want to find an optimal control protocol which doesn't depend on the initial state. So you want to find an optimal control protocol for this F1 ATPase. This is also unsolved problem. What if you have a system basically composed of many particles? For example, if you want to make an engine composed of many colloidal particles, and you want to find what is the optimal control strategy by which you operate that engine so that the efficiency is maximum, maybe field theory may be helpful to compute optimal control protocol. And then for time delay system, this can be also interesting to find optimal control protocol for time delay system or non-Markovian system. And so far I talked about average work, that's all. But system has fluctuation. One can ask that how these fluctuation can be minimized. That can be also a complicated problem, and one can also try to investigate. So there are many different problems in this direction. So in the end, I would like to thank all my collaborators who contributed in this research significantly, and all the funding organizations. And then I would like to thank you all for your kind attention. I'm happy to take the question.
Question?
Yes. So we know that the nature is a very good optimizer. So is it maybe also something that you find that some of these optimal protocols are displayed by nature already?
Yeah, that's what we were trying to find. For example, FO and F1. So this F1 is a highly efficient one, and we don't know how FO drives F1 because it's a nanoscale molecular machine. So what we do, we take F1 outside and we try to rotate with a different technique. For example, in the recent work, we try to rotate with two different techniques. Either you apply constant torque, for example, FO drives in a constant torque manner, or it confines this crankshaft in some kind of trap, and then it drives F1. So by doing that, what happens that there is some feedback mechanism that is acting on F1. And that actually helps to less dissipate or this molecular motor to dissipate less amount of energy. Maybe this is not like we want to claim, but this is like maybe molecular machines are operated by this kind of motion. So when you have some kind of trap kind of motion, and trap actually helps the motor not to dissipate too much amount of energy, and this increases the efficiency of the molecular machine.
Can you give us a little bit of context why this minimization of dissipation is important in general? Why people are interested in that question? Because I think for many of us, it's not clear what's the motivation for this minimizing dissipation?
Yeah. So first motivation that comes from the molecular motor, we want to understand how this molecular motor works. I mean, what is the efficient strategy they follow? What are the efficient strategies they follow to drive the molecular motor? For example, nature, these molecular machines are quite efficient. Like for example, if you look at bacteriophage 529, which is quite efficient, or FOF1, this is quite efficient. Even kinesin is also good, efficient, but not that at the same level. So then we want to understand, maybe there is a way to understand that how this molecular machine operate, and that maybe we can understand how nature works, and that's how the nature works, and maybe that's how the machine are driven, and they are dissipating less amount of energy, and we will get more idea about how nature works. Yeah.
So I have a question related to that. So with the stochastic reset, so how does this compare nature to something like the levy flight, levy walk?
Yeah, it's a kind of similar one. So level flight is basically a system actually diffuses around and just flies away at certain far distance. Yeah.
It's also an optimal search strategy. So I was just wondering,
Yeah.
this one, I guess it's something about locality.
Uh,
Something here, because the resetting, you know, this resource or whatever is nearby.
yeah.
So this is going to be better than this kind of continuous.
Yeah, I mean, there are research where they are comparing level flight with resetting one. They are also trying to mix both of them. But and level flight basically jumps are drawn from a power law
Yeah,
distribution.
exactly.
But here the jumps are one can model this also in using level flight kind of thing. But in resetting, you come back to initial location
Exactly.
instantaneously.
So there's something known that it's local, right? So you just
Yeah.
have to, it's more of a local thorough search rather than this kind of.
Yeah, it's like basically, if you look at the first paper, it looks like that mean the setting that rate I talked about. Here. So here, so resetting rate depends upon how far you are from the target.
Mhm.
So if you are very far from the target, so you have to relax your reset. So you know you should have some kind of prior knowledge about the target, where the target is. If you don't know, then you are just blindly exploring around. But
Well, what about like, because here you just basically just got a random walk, right? And then-
yeah, it's a random walk.
What if you just put in a levy walk and then did the reset?
Yeah, there are research. So it's called power law resetting protocols. There are other kind of spatial ones also. There are different type of mechanism. I mean, from since 2011, it's been 14 years. We see explosion of research in this direction. A lot of research in this direction. Putting system, people are trying to understand different type of system, chemicals, species, reactions, and all these things.
I'd be curious to know which one, because here you're talking about microscopic kind of chemical processes, but in the movement ecology, normally it's like bigger random walks.
Yeah,
But maybe that's a distinction. I don't know.
yeah.
But the resetting makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even nature, we think that, okay, yeah, species actually comes back. For example, monkeys, they come back to their cave or the tree.
Some do, some
Yeah.
don't. So it
Some-
depends on the
yeah.
species. But that's-
Yeah. So it's like kind of optimization problem. But yeah, this says that, okay, very simple strategy when if one perform that coming back to initial location, that helps to find the target quite easily. Because you're cutting down trajectories which are going far away from the target. Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, so time to be back again.